more about it, or if you want to work more with this population, I'd recommend seeking one of them out after this and talking to them about it. And finally, there's an Internet and Technology Addiction Anonymous group. And I've got pamphlets up here. They meet in an office on Pearl Street, and they're a 12-step community. So it's sort of a new thing just in general. I think it may be the second one in the country. And so it's a unique thing that's happening, but they're running. So if you've got someone who wants something, that wants some structure that involves a 12-step program, it's there in Boulder. And then finally, in terms of screening instruments, I brought copies of screening instruments up here if you want to grab some when you're done. But these are instruments that are often used in research that you can use in your client sessions if you want to help clients establish a baseline as to how they evaluate their own technology use. So there are two that have been developed. The Internet Addiction Test, which was developed by Kimberly Young, I think it was developed like 15 years ago or something like that. She's one of the main pioneers in terms of technology addiction. She's been on this beat for a long time, and her instrument's been translated into something like 20 different languages. It's been validated and is used often. And then the second one is called PRIUS. That's the Problematic Risky Internet Use Screening Scale. And I think that they added an S so they didn't get sued by Toyota. But when I go to use a scale, which I don't do often, but when I do, I use PRIUS. It was developed about, I think, 3 or 4 years ago, and I like it because I feel like, well, essentially the questions are broken down in a different way, so that different questions on the screening tool refer to different levels of extreme problematic internet use. So as the scale gets, as you get lower in the scale, some of the behaviors, if clients are scoring higher on those behaviors, then they're more indicative of problematic or risky internet use. So it's parsed out in a way that you can get an idea and a snapshot of how risky their use may be just based on the way they fill out the screen. So what else this does from a motivational interviewing perspective is it gives you an idea of what directions to go in. So especially if you aren't someone who has much of an idea of what some of these technologies look like, what the landscape for online gaming looks like, or just online addictions in general, then this can be a great way to just sort of get the client to just come out with what things they self-identify as wanting help with or needing to work on. And then you can do it at early in treatment, and then do it in a month, do it in 3 months, but just sort of keep a pace to see if they feel like they're making progress. So in conclusion, I had a quote that I really liked from one of the clinicians who said, we see a lot of really, really bad stuff. It's not their fault, it's not the family's fault. It's just we see this entrenchment in the wrong treatment and the wrong diagnoses. So it's really not about just getting help, it's really about getting the right kind of help. So again, they're talking about this idea of comorbidity and needing to treat both the addiction and comorbid disorder. So if you just treat one, it's likely that the other one's going to come up, and they're going to slip back into the other. One thing I've come to think is really important in all this is that technology is often used with the best of intentions. When I started research, I think I was really someone that was like, no, like get it out of there, just like it's evil. Like, if it did what it did to me for a year and a half, it's gonna do it to everyone. And I've come a lot back more towards the middle. And when you think about it, people are just using this because they want something else. Like kids are using it because they want to connect with someone else. They're connecting with people in ways that we didn't imagine 10, 15 years ago. They're connecting with people on the other side of the world. They're collaborating on incredible ideas and concepts that we've never seen before. And parents want their kids to succeed more than anything. They want kids to be successful. They want them to be equipped to compete in the job market when they get of age. They want them to be in the know about important things in their lives. But just like anything else, too much anything can be a bad thing. So at this point, I'd be really open to any questions or comments you got. I've got my contact info at the bottom here. And just to note that it turns out the cards I brought today, my email is incorrect on the card, so this is if you want to email me, Dave S. BIPR.org is a good way to get in touch with me. But yeah, any questions or comments? Yeah.
Hey, gosh, I feel like I have so many questions. Thank you. This is so interesting. Feels so cutting edge. I'm curious to know the first AA group, where that was started too. Do you know?
The first I think it was started at in Washington outside of Restart.
Okay.
I think I'm not sure though.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks. So my big question kind of is just around the comorbidity, and I was surprised to not see obesity on the list, and I was just wondering if that's.
It is.
Okay.
Yeah. So sedentary behaviors in general are often going to be correlated for obvious reasons, and that's certainly something that's there. There's a whole medical side to it that I didn't bring in today. Frankly, I haven't read in a while, so I don't remember it well enough. I feel like I can talk about it now, but there are clinicians that are looking at that. There's an increased risk for just medical complications. They're seeing some of the ones that are coming up for me is that it's got a pretty significant impact on people's vision, and that they're seeing signs of blood pressure irregularities. So you're getting higher increased rates of just really general basic life functioning that at a young age should be normal, but they're seeing complicated features physically.
I like that you brought an attachment frame in terms of what it's interrupting and what opportunities are not there. And I'm curious if there's been any research on overuse. I mean, there's the addiction side, and I mean, I'm a therapist, but I teach graduate students. It's amazing. Like, I've had to really struggle with that in class.
Yep.
You know, that phenomenon of like, you got to be present with your clients, so let's just put it away and have a conversation. But it's just such an evolving thing. And then I have a 9-year-old son who's got dyslexia, and it's just such a thing that's part of why I'm like, oh, there's something and I worked at CU for 17 years, and I'm like, where's that? It's so evolving so quickly. And even my 26-year-old nephew, who's a huge gamer, is like, wow, he can just take it wherever he goes, like the mobility of it. And so I guess overuse is sort of, and how that is affecting the parent-child relationship in this younger kind of population is really sort of what I really struggle with. I mean, my sense of working with addiction is like, this feels really familiar about the dopamine receptor, something's going on.
Right.
And we're just seeing it emerge with, like you just said, in the last 2 to 4 years, what's happening with tablets. It's really disturbing. And then just a conflict. I mean, 90% of my conflict with my son is around limit setting.
Right.
So I'm just kind of curious about the overuse, but not addiction, because I think, I don't know what we're going to see 5-10 years from now.
Yeah.
But I'm worried about overuse and just the like a hampering effect. Like, I can even see, I adore my 26-year-old nephew.
Yeah.
But I can feel that there's some sense that developmentally that he got somewhat hampered by it. And he's going to be fine. He's lovely.
Sure. Yeah.
He's just this lovely human being.
Right.
But I can tell that it sort of hampered some things. But he also says, you know, it made connections, because he's kind of like that generation that's emerging.
Yeah, absolutely.
That's had it. So I guess, I don't know what my question is, but more in that overuse but not addiction thing, and the developmental missed opportunities, I guess.
So I have some thoughts about that. And I think a good place to start is just that idea that, is it an addiction or is it problematic use? And that's why Prius was developed, was that they had some ideas about that, well, we think this is more problematic use, that it enables the behavior rather than the use itself being the problem. And so, certainly from an attachment perspective, you're getting either an increase in enmeshed behaviors or an increase in neglectful behaviors. And so what I'm talking about there in terms of enmeshed behaviors, you can get an overbearing parent or an oversensitive child that needs to check in with a parent to make sure everything they do is going to be okay, rather than being able to sort of step into that and sort of trust that they have the tools necessary to be okay in the world. So you can get a child that's just constantly connecting, am I doing this right? Is this okay? Or you can have the parent that's every 30 minutes, where are you? what the attachment research says is that as people start in their lives, they can start with secure attachments, and that some of these enmeshed or neglectful behaviors can actually alter the attachment system. So it can alter the internal working model and lead to insecure attachments. So when they looked at, they did a longitudinal study on 16-year-olds that they followed for 2 years, and found that in cases where they had enmeshed mothers, those that went in with secure relationships left with insecure relationships. So this idea that you can constantly connect definitely is good. Again, it's going to undermine that goal-corrected partnership. The idea that we need to regulate each other mutually and have some faith that we can regulate each other mutually. Yeah, and just graduate students in general, like that's something I've heard at the university, that now the TAs have become like a police of sorts in the classrooms, that some of the professors have them sitting at the back of classrooms and just policing student technology use and making sure the students aren't like on Facebook while class is happening or anything like that. So it's just an interesting use of an important resource. Like a TA is a valuable resource in an academic setting, and it's like you in the third row. You know. Does that answer your question, or is there something else?
I mean, I guess it's how to negotiate anything. Like I was just actually in the car with somebody that's was talking about teaching kids about their own stop button. Like when is it something that helps you unwind, and when is it something that you can't stop? Mm-hmm. And I thought, well, that's an interesting concept. I wonder if you can, but it's almost like it's so enticing. I'm not sure that that's a function kids often, because I don't want to just be like, it's a really curious phenomenon, and I think it's so enticing. Technology is so enticing.
Yeah.
That I really, that what you said about the Tetris effect is, are we teaching the creative exploration, novelty seeking, social engagement, and the kind of those kinds of qualities that should be cultivated in adolescence? That's what the Brainstorm that Daniel Siegel just wrote is, and all those kind of qualities that should be cultivated in adolescence. I feel like technology is interrupting that process.
Yeah, and just the process of play. So play is another system in the brain that at a young age is one of the most important systems, because play helps cope with all the other messy emotional systems. So it helps cope with fear, anger, rejection, isolation, separation, anxiety, panic, stress, all these other things. So play at a young age has to do with an individual's ability to get in there and sort of joke with someone, but also push someone and see where their boundaries are. And so play is this sophisticated response to figuring out how the environment I live in works. And it's because it's something that we enjoy. It's this really wonderful thing because we get to figure that out in a fun way. But every now and then, kids push each other a little too hard. Someone falls down. Someone gets hurt. So this ability for kids to be able to engage in rough and tumble play or engage in various types of explorative play are really important to their development, and just imaginative play in general. Now that being said, when kids engage in play and technology, the track is often set. So the way that's different from play in the real world is that play is a lot more explorative, and there are spatial dynamics that you're learning in terms of how your body moves and how other people's bodies move in response to your own, how various actions have consequences in the world. But when you just sit down and play an online game, while you may be, especially with a lot of tablets, you may be balancing and things like that, or you may be doing analytical thinking. Essentially, there's this lost opportunity that the more you're seeing these behaviors, the less opportunities there are to learn about the environment that you live in. And so if you're not learning about the environment that you live in, there's often more anxiety about interacting in that environment. And so, personally, I think this increase in what people are calling introversion, I think may be something else entirely. That I'm personally really curious about that, if it's introversion or if there's something else happening that's leading to people feeling unsafe in the world.
I know it was sort of said that you weren't going to talk about what I'm going to ask you about.
Okay, go for
And I
it.
might have to wait for your next talk. But I'm very curious what you recommend to parents. And if you could just sort of briefly.
So that's something I'm going to do a lot more research in before I get there, because at this point I've been doing a lot of my research has been around just collecting things at the periphery as to what we're seeing with video game addiction and sort of foundational what I talked about today. In terms of practical applications, my approach is a lot along the lines of starting with sacred spaces. Just the idea that creating opportunities for relationship to be primary in interactions. So whether it's no phones at the dinner table, or no phones on Saturdays, or every Saturday afternoon we're going to do something as a family, but some way that you can really incite that idea of the tribe and of being in a community that supports you, I think is the starting point.
So you give them an alternative of like being with the family or doing something other than. I mean, I have a friend who has a 15-year-old, I was going to say 13-year-old because it seems kind of younger than me.
Yeah.
And she has a really hard time with this because if she tells him to go off the computer, he doesn't make friends easily at all, and he doesn't want to do anything else, and he just gets kind of real whiny, and she gets kind of at a loss to know what to do with
Absolutely.
him.
Yep. And so my guess is we'll start to see some sort of increase in a prevalence of something like a support group, because that's not an isolated case. I hear a lot of similar stories, but I think right now that personally I believe there's a reluctance to admit this can be a problem, because I think a lot of parents are so enamored with technology. And there's a lot of adaptive uses to technology, so I don't think it's to be eradicated.
Right.
But I do believe that there are skills that could be helpful for people to learn to help assuage some of this anxiety and difficulty interpersonally.
One of the recommendations that I make for parents is that they watch their kid to look at how much they are getting dysregulated around stopping, and how much they seem driven to go to the video games, and that's the piece that they need to monitor, because each kid is sort of different in that degree, and if there is that, then you need to find a time, not when they're playing on the video game, to really talk to them about your concerns, and then set some limits about, you can get on the video game, but you're going to have to be able to stop. And if you're not able to stop when I ask you to stop, then that's letting me know that you don't really have control over it. And once kids get that, they often will cut back their own usage, because they'll notice where their limit is and how much they can actually do before they get to that point where they're exploding. So that's just one of the things.
There was a question in the back.
I had a question, because you're talking, it sounds like more about kind of fun games, like, whatever, Tetris or whatever. I obviously haven't played video games in a while. Talking about Tetris and Pac-Man.
Watch out, you take yourself sometimes.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
It's
Play
awesome.
Donkey Kong or Mario.
Yeah. And I'm just thinking about sort of parents with younger kids and how much educational content there is in games, and how you sort of, as I was listening to it, I was like, gosh, are these kind of like the gateway drug, right? Because kids get used to, and it's easier for parents because you're like, oh, well, they're learning ABCs and they're learning, math or whatever it is. And so I was just sort of curious about your thoughts on that way of getting kids used to playing video games.
So that's another great point. And so Dimitri Christakis looked at effects of television use on longer term consequences, and he found that children who are that were watching TV more often at a younger age were more likely to have attentional difficulties at 7 years of age, and that for every hour of TV watched, there were on average 6 to 8 fewer words learned by the child as they got older. So learning theory would suggest that children learn best in the presence of a human being. So personally, I have a problem with the online games because they're billed as being so beneficial for your child, when, again, I would go back to this idea of the lost opportunity. The research that I've looked at says definitively that there is no conclusive research that these programs are helpful for kids. But because of the way they're designed, they appeal to our adult analytical mind. But again, at a younger age, there's a lot more nonverbal, spatial, somatic learning that's happening. And so if we're talking about learning your ABCs, and you're talking about hitting a button and getting a reward versus having a parent looking and praising the kid, you're talking about two completely different experiences. But, and I'll use the word but, I understand, like, some families are two-income households where there is not a whole lot of time, and again, this goes back to the lesser evil. They want their kids to be learning somewhere, and there's not an easy solution there. So I think it's a both and. It's, yes, like, they want their kids to be doing something, and there can be consequences.
This whole conversation kind of touches on what I was thinking. First, before I get in, I want to mention that I got into a fight over a video game when I was a kid. My friend Steve punched me in the face while we were playing Mario because something happened.
Yeah, sure.
So I had this intimate experience of gamer rage, visceral experience of gamer rage. And so I know you work with college students, and I'm pretty sure you could probably, with fair accuracy, say that there is probably classify a lot of people on that campus with an addiction of some sort, if you really wanted to, if you really want to call a spade a spade. And so not all of those people will go on to be addicted to something, whether it's alcohol or. So I've been thinking about the ways in which attachment relationships are maybe building or have something to do with the severity of an internet addiction or a gaming addiction, and the way that it sort of plays itself out in someone's life. So I'm thinking about this example of, here kid, go take this, and that this will do my job for me. And I'm thinking about how I see that a lot. That I feel like if those kinds of things I would describe as maybe a subtle rupture in the attachment relationship, or maybe not so subtle rupture. Maybe it's pervasive. And I'm wondering if you might be willing to make the broad statement with me that perhaps the attachment system, perhaps an internet addiction or a gaming addiction, if it emerges to the point where somebody it's really acute, has emerged out of a ruptured attachment system to begin with. If, the same way that I suspect many other addictions are.
Yes. Yeah. So I do believe that what it is, whether we're calling it problematic internet use or internet addiction disorder or technology addiction, I believe we're talking about an attachment disorder, which isn't diagnostic. It's not listed in the DSM at this point. However, in terms of how I sort of conceptualize clients that I work with, in terms of attachment theory, I do think it's an attachment disorder. So when I'm looking through research on what's emerging about the brain and how we interact, I feel like there's an awful lot of parallels in terms of attachment ruptures, and personally, I feel like we're talking about a form of neglect when we go back to the treatment participant who said, my mom was always on her phone when I wanted to talk with her. This isn't neglect in the classic case that we're talking about, a parent not feeding their child. But when we're breaking down that term in the concept or in the structure of an attachment relationship, we're talking about the avoidance of a person and the inability to acknowledge the dysregulation that's occurring in the other one. So I do believe on some level there's some avoidance of that emotional regulation, which for the younger individual translates into a feeling of not being seen.
It's interesting that, I don't know if it was conscious, but your prescribed treatments, to me, seem to be repairing attachment relationships with the family.
Yeah.
Spend more time together, have a technology-free zone, take the buffer away.
I think that's where I often go with this stuff, is just that idea of like getting back to basics. It's like, 20 years ago we didn't have this stuff, and not that everything was peaches and cream 20 years ago, but things were different, and that's what I'll often talk about. It's just getting back to that sort of stuff, these real basic hobbies, these rituals that existed, that were passed on between people, that were passed on in communities, ways of perceiving the world that aren't left up to the individual to figure out through online exploration, that are passed on from the elders of the community to help them understand the world and interpret the world.
I think one of the things that's happening too is I think the parents are really struggling, and I guess I'll say parents, but it's me, but it's also I see it with so many people of work boundaries and double income families and the blurred boundaries, and I'm going to tell this story, and please don't think that I'm neglecting my son, but he came up to me, luckily this is a sign of secure connection.
No, there's no
but I was
judgment
teaching
here.
an internet.
My dog closed my computer screen.
I was teaching an online course, and I it's great. I have flexibility because I can be home with him and that kind of stuff. But it did get out of control. I was doing work, but which was nice because he doesn't have to be in after school care. But he came up after me and he said, "Mom, you're looking at your computer," and he said, "Here I am with you, but I feel like I'm alone."
Wow.
And I closed my computer. It was a moment, but I think I just see so many parents, struggling because also workplaces have all this idealized worker kind of, you have to have a lot of time availability, and so there's also this whole cultural moment around accessibility of workers that is, I think we're just going to get this, it feels like we're struggling with this neglectful culture in families that don't value families culturally and that kind of primary relationship piece. And I think we're going to have to really support a lot of people in really getting back to that. And because we're getting caught up too, and I see the families I work with really struggling with that. And it's a big, neglect is so slippery. It's such a slippery, subtle thing, and yet when you see a client who's been neglected in some way emotionally, it's not subtle at all. But they can't see it because it's the water they're swimming in, and it completely affects their effectiveness in their life and their sense of themselves and being an agent in the world. And it's just, I'm worried about that our cultural moment.
And to get back to what Ben was saying, I often find myself telling people, like, get to know your neighbor, like, get to know the people next door, even if you think he's annoying, like, just get to know him. Like, part of just sort of learning to tolerate relationships is tolerating the whole package. And again, there's this idea that I can be in a relationship with you and just start like looking at my phone is communicating something non-verbally. Is that I've got something better to do. But I think, and this is something that Sherry Turkle talks about a lot, is this idea that we're separating from each other, and we need to value the whole individual, not just the parts that we like. And so I think you're right. People, the family unit and just the idea of the family unit has changed, and just the idea that the helicopter parent has been evolving, and now that the term has come out, the bulldozer parent. And this is the idea that these are the parents that aren't just hovering over their kids. They're going to the administrators and saying, "This is what my child needs, and I'm going to make it hell for you if you don't." So there's this new thing coming out where all of a sudden we've lost faith in the people that are there to care for our kids that aren't us. There's this idea that we need to be the ones that care for our kids. When we look at this through, and again, I'm looking at this through attachment theory. People are welcome to look at it through their own lens and have other opinions, but when I'm looking at this through attachment theory, that's in conflict with what the theory suggests in terms of what's most helpful for that individual. So there is a process of individuating and creating a new attachment system that's so important to that person. And without that, there's going to be a decreased ability to face some of those stressors.
I think some of the hyper-parenting is that they get out of touch and they get neglectful, and then they come in a really intrusive, overdoing sort of way that's not attuned. And so they're not it's a dance that's really out of sync.
Right.
And that's what I'm concerned about.
Two left feet.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Carol?
Well, it also, from the attachment lens, it also seems as though there's a period in the relationship where the child has to learn that the parent can disappoint them, and then the relationship can be repaired. And that it's not getting through that piece that could lend itself to the internet going to things that will always be predictable.
And will tell us how to be. I mean, you can go online and say like, 5 ways to be the best parent, like that, and you know,
Right.
you'll get people. I've got clients that come in and be like, I went to this thing online. It says I have to do this, this, and this to be happy, and I'm like, wow, that's it. So I mean, you know, people are making their.
They're baking.
Yeah, they're making their careers online, and you're doing that through creating these lists and things. So yeah, there's often great suggestions in there, and to say that there's one way of being happy is a falsehood. And the other piece that you commented on, just that idea of disappointment. One thing I went through attachment theory that I find really comforting is this idea of being good enough. That attachment theory doesn't claim that parents need to be perfect, it's that they just need to be good enough. And I find that to be incredibly comforting as I look to becoming a parent in the future. It's like, okay, I can be good enough, and I can sometimes be bad probably, but I can be good enough. And it's that idea that when there's a disruption, when there's disappointment, you can at least come and say like, how did I screw up? What did I do? What's going on for you? Like, how can we move forward given what I've done?
And that's an incredibly empowering thing for a kid, to know that that can take place in a healthy relationship.
Yeah. You had a question?
I guess a couple of comments. Just so glad that people like you are doing this research, and it's both such a relief, and yet it stirs the pot so much for me too. And one person that comes to mind, if others don't know of him, who's a local Boulderite that no doubt you've come across, is Nicholas Carr, and he's someone I follow all the time. He's got a blog site called Rough Type, where he kind of shares some of his less popular, more extreme ideas about what kinds of damage we can anticipate down the road. His most recent track is looking at automation. I forget what the name of the book is after The Shallows, but the more recent one is about automation and all of the things we're forgetting how to do because of the automation of our lives. He's tracking this whole thing with automation and mapping the systems that are available to us for mapping, and how it's eroding our internal mapping, which is affecting our memory and is also affecting our sense of home and place.
Right.
But the larger question, and it's something that he addresses too, when you see Nicholas Carr and you talk to him, and you bring up the topic of kids, and something that I'm happy to hear being discussed here is our parental role and our modeling. He always says, you know, if you want to talk about kids, let's talk about parents first. Let's talk about the adults. Let's talk about what we're doing before we even go and look at what the kids are doing. And that's sort of what I came in here with. It's like, if anyone I know thinks that this isn't a topic worth looking at, stop and consider how quickly we're walking into this world of trouble and new ways of interacting every single day as adults. I mean, imagine if you're born into this and sort of the challenges of it.
Yeah, exactly. And just from the time when I did my so I completed the thesis in 2012, and since then the amount of research that's come out is remarkable.
Yeah,
It's
sure.
like from the time I was doing my lit review to what came out the year after, I was astounded that people are starting to pay attention.
Yeah.
We're looking at something. Yeah, thanks. Carol?
Just a really quick comment. When you look at how much kids want to be like their parents too, my niece has a pretty high-powered job, and she's on her various things all the time. So of course my nephew wants that same experience. He wants to be on her. And she's doing actually a remarkably good job of monitoring and limiting his access. But it just seems so normal that kids want to do what their parents are doing.
Right. Yeah, I mean, you know, they got those little like little steering wheel things.
Right, exactly.
Yeah.
It makes me think, I have a friend in his early 50s
who was just hired by Riot. What's the game that Riot?
League of Legends.
Right. And he was hired to help the employees at that company learn how to relate with each other. That is his job.
They're one of the better organizations at tracking their user data and making it publicly available, which I think speaks to their desire to want to make this a conversation. So if people are interested, I brought some of the books that I've pulled a lot of my research from. If you want to check them out, go ahead and check them out. But otherwise, thanks for coming, everyone.
Thank you.
You're good at sparking conversations.
Yeah.